Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Sit Down with Shibby. Today I am joined by Matthew Samuelson, aka the former rank 1 Braum of NA, aka the Taco Bell Titan, aka the golf grandpa himself, but most commonly and most famously known as Cubby. What's up, man?
Not much. It hurts that I golfed today, I will say. That's I mean, it might help the intro. Who knows? I didn't play well, but it was good to get out. And with all the chaos going on, it's been quite an interesting couple of weeks.
And I just want to quickly go on to it. Were you actually the former rank 1 North American Braum? Can you give some background to that? Like, I mean, it's a perfect. Who are you and why were you the former rank 1 Braum NA?
Yeah, according to a third-party website, I was.
Okay.
So way back, like when I first got into League, I actually wanted to be a player. So my freshman year of high school was season 4, going into season 5, and I ended up being like Diamond 1, hard stuck, whatever LP, because I didn't have Master Tier back then.
Yeah, it was D198 LP, right? It was like
really something
good.
like that.
Yeah,
I never got that high up, but I remember getting to 90. So yeah, I ended up playing for my collegiate team for my first 2 years, and I played like 3 or 4 different roles. I went from jungle to support to AD to mid, and I ended up playing 4 roles competitively with the team, and then I was just their like manager and sub moving on. So I ended up always playing Phil on the ladder. So at some point in League, I've been Diamond 1, like maining every role. Because I either Phil or like I get bored and I'll be like, hey, I'm going to play top lane for a couple weeks. That's kind of how I kept the game fresh for myself way back. So how I got to be number 1 Braum NA was that season 10, I was working full time. I was out of League, but it was before COVID. And the new start of the season came out. And I was like, all right, I'll commit to playing as many games of League as possible for just a month and see what happens. I ended up getting like early season GM. So I think I was like top like 80 on the ladder at some point early season. And I was the number 1 Braum NA. I was playing Braum, Leona, and Thresh. And my Thresh win rate was not as high as my Thresh skills. But, things get a little bit harder the higher elo you get. So there were some good players I was going up against. I still remember getting destroyed by Tactical and Core JJ. That was fun. Yeah.
Not many people can actually say that, though, right? Not many people can be like, oh yeah, like I laned against Tactical and Core JJ. Like you were playing against, at least at the beginning of the season, amateur players, pro players, right? Like that in season. And that's, I'm going to say that's a pretty unique perspective considering that you're a color caster, right? A lot of casters are not actually that high rank. I would say, right, across the board. I mean, obviously like LCS, I think like Jat has been Diamond. I think Kobe has hit like Masters, Grandmaster, Boost Challenger. But like across the board, if you look at all the casters, especially color casters, your game knowledge relative to your skill in the game is pretty even, right? And that's been like that was a hotly contested point, I believe, about 6 to 8 months ago. What is your actual opinion on that?
So for me, I don't play the game during the season. Like I think the last time I really spammed, I hit Diamond 1, playing Phil, but mostly jungle, like in between last spring and summer. I think I'm like 30 games of ranked in Diamond 4 right now. It's not the best use of my time to play. And I don't have the skill where, like Cadril, where he's played at this level for way longer at a way higher level than I have, because I wasn't able to sustain being GM. I did have a full-time job, so yeah, I couldn't get my 6 games a day, which I think is like the minimum you need for your skill, just to be there. But yeah, there are other ways to find game knowledge than just your rank, and you can like exhibit that game knowledge besides what your rank just is. Now, if you're gold versus a challenger player, I'm going to say the challenger player 9 out of 10 times, 99 out of 100 times is probably going to have more game knowledge than you. So that's just what the game is. But just because you're gold doesn't mean that you can't be smart about the game. You can study the same resources that I do. Go through pro VODs. Maybe you can't talk to pros or talk to people that are high in the ladder, but you can go through videos and figure out what they're doing and how they do it, and actually bring up smart points like, hey, maybe you should have taken second wind instead of bone plating in this matchup, and here's why. Anyone can figure that out. It's just that as a challenger player, you are exhibiting that you figured it out through your rank. Whereas if you don't have that rank, you have to find other ways to prove that you can get knowledge like that. So I think that if you are high elo, like it can't hurt, but I don't think it's a requirement. Now, the fact that I have done it is nice, but I will argue that my game knowledge has only gone down since I started, in some aspects. I miss like the very intricate, like, here's why you're doing these builds more often than I did way back when, because I was playing more then. So I would like actually be able to experience like, hey, I played this matchup, and yeah, this feels way better than this, right? Like I just figured out, I felt like how like the big difference. I've been playing like a water Renekton with my friends because they just stick me top lane, and I'm good enough to be solo up there. So I figured out like how much better it feels when you take the attack speed rune in the yellow tree versus tenacity as Renekton. You can stack Fury, and I was like, whoa, this actually won me this matchup. I think I was playing against Aurelia, and I was able to like stack up Fury stacks. So that was really nice. And like once it's easier to feel that and then be like, okay, like wow, this felt different. For me, I always played the game off feel. So I think that's like the biggest difference. I just don't have that as much.
Yeah, I think it provides a unique perspective, but also you can kind of get like false knowledge sometimes, right? Where it's like, oh, I played the Victor Oriana matchup, and I think Victor's like 55-45, but it's like, no, it's actually 60-40 Oriana. Like you just, it's when it's dangerous to do it when you just solely be like, oh yeah, I'm like a high level player. This is how I interpret the matchup. Versus in your case, you played at a high level, but you also analyze the game at a high level, right? You do VOD reviews. Like you said, you talk to pro players, you gather general consensus, you look at what the other regions are doing. Like that's kind of your whole job. It's almost as if as a caster is studying the game as a whole more than, maybe like a challenger or a pro level player would be doing, whereas they're probably studying their role more intimately, but they're receiving knowledge about other things probably from their teammates and stuff like that. Would you agree with that?
For the most part. And I think that like something I actually tell a lot of pros is like, hey, early in the season, if you want to break from the game, like you still want to play, or just like you finish your competitive season, just give another role like 2 or 3 weeks. Just see what it's like or see what happens. Because some of the knowledge that you're going to pick up, I think of just learning a skill, like in anything, right? There's diminishing returns eventually when you get to be as good as these guys are. So if you've been playing marksman at a challenger level for 4 years straight, and you queue marksman and support as your 2 roles, what happens if you go play top lane for like 3 weeks? Or what happens if you go play jungle for 3 weeks? Like, what are you going to learn that you can then be like, hey, when I get in my next competitive scenario, I can actually tell my support or tell my jungler like, hey, this is what's good for that role, right? And we can try it, like we can actually play around that and play to fit that. And that's something that I think makes a big difference in terms of really melding as a team, is just finding that understanding of, hey, what do we need for this game? Because every game of League is going to be different, but you can still find a lot of patterns that you can replicate. And having an idea of what your role is in the game, I think those are the teams that are always going to find success when everyone is on the same page of what they need to individually do, and then how that incorporates with what the team needs to do. So I think picking up knowledge in other roles actually can really help round out your gameplay, and something that as a fill player, I always found value in. I don't jungle nearly as much anymore, and the jungle changes like so much. Like I haven't filled that for, I guess, even a year. That's one role that is tough to do. Like everyone's going to struggle with like different roles, but pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, like you will pick up more general knowledge doing that. Because if you just only excel in one role, then you get diminishing returns eventually. Now, I think it's really important to peak in one role, because then you realize, what is everything that I need to know about the game and in this role in order to be really, really good at this? It can be to the highest level in this. Then you take what you learn there and then apply it elsewhere. So I think that is so important. I would still like favor that, as everyone does, given how teams function. But again, when you're out of comp season, how much can you get from just playing a different role for a few weeks? That's what I tell like a lot of players. Give it a go. Like, why not? Take a break that way. Like, give your mind a new puzzle to figure out, and then keep on working on your craft.
I think it's pretty good advice, just not even in League, just in general, right? In life. Like, hey, if you're doing something for a long time, take a side project on, learn a language or whatever, right? I think there's a lot of that can be derived from not just a League, but also just applying what you're saying into life.
Yep.
you want to take a step back. We talked a little bit about the game theory, but I want to know, actually, for people that don't know who Matthew Samuelson is or who is Cubby, like, who are you? What do you do? How did you get into esports in League? You kind of teased us a little bit. You wanted to be a pro player at the time when, Masters and Challengers didn't even exist. I do know from a little bit of your background, you, like you said, competed on a collegiate team. I believe you also coached that same collegiate team at one point, and then you kind of transitioned into casting, I believe, post-COVID, correct? Do I have the general timeline correct?
Yeah, so, I started off competing at that school. Quickly realized that after the first year where I tried to go pro, and I kind of hinted at, I was really burned out after that year. I had no friends. I was out of shape, and I mentally was just burned out. So I came back to campus, like, what is a better way to go about this? So I had a much healthier relationship with my computer and the PC. And with another student who was a senior on campus, she started spearheading, like, having a varsity esports program. And I remember looking around being like, there's no way that we can pull this off. We ended up pulling it off. Thanks to her and then the help from, we had some great professors on campus that are still working with the program and still working at Miami that are just unbelievable. They really saw that, this could be something that's new. We took our professor to MLG Columbus 2016 because I went to Miami, Ohio, and he sat in the CSGO audience for 2 rounds and was like, all right, I'm sold. Like, if this is what the crowd's reacting like to this game, like, this is going to be something. So we ended up building a program. We started with 3 teams. I was kind of like a coach / manager of the league team and just like a student director is what my title was in the program. I wanted to work in gaming. Ended up not finding a job in gaming. I found a marketing job, though, that somewhat related to gaming in a way. Like, I thought they were going to use my esports knowledge outside of school. They didn't. Company pivoted quite a bit, which is fine. But yeah, I ended up just working a marketing job for 2 years, and I spectated everything. I followed up all the regions like what I usually did as a coach, and then COVID hit, and it was just an excuse to kind of get back into this. So in 21, I ended up coaching Miami's team remotely while I casted, and then also took part-time hours for that job where COVID, like, the day COVID hit, it was event-based, so we got laid off immediately. So yeah, I kind of used that to get here. So I've been full-time casting now for a year and a half. This will be my 2nd year at the end of this year.
Yeah, and you said there was a point in your life where you were, I think it was like, you said it like somewhere in an interview or something like that. You were working. 1 second. I'll just keep that in. My partner is showering. You said in an interview that you were at one point, I think you were working 2 part-time jobs and you were casting at one point, right? Or you talk to me about that, because that's 40, 50 maybe hours a week part-time working, but then you're also putting in the knowledge to cast, and to get to the level that you got to, you got there very quickly, right? You excelled. I would say you excelled at a very high rate in terms of, bringing yourself up to the level you're at now. It was what's seemingly now 2 years up until you started casting, 2-3 years now, and you're at the level of tier 2 casting. You're pretty much on the forefront of CLOL, on the forefront of all the amateur leagues, right? NACL obviously being the most prominent one, but even when it was scouting grounds, proving grounds, all that kind of stuff. What was that process like? Because you talked about being burnt out as a player, but I'm surprised you didn't have those same issues, considering you were working 2 jobs plus casting plus all the work that you generally put in. What was different?
I like this a lot better than being a player. That was the difference. I really like this job, and I mean, yeah, I had 2 part-time jobs. So one was my old marketing job, but those were always dwindling hours, and it just kind of depended on what was going on. I was busiest during football season, which, funnily enough, is actually kind of dead zone for tier 2 caster, because that's when Worlds goes on for the most part, and off season. And then coaching collegiately, some nights I had conflicts, and I would just be up front with my team. There was one day where I was missing, and the team kind of boomed, and I felt really terrible about that. But that's going to happen with any team. But for the most part, and that job helped out with my casting. I had access to scrims. I had access to, I'd say, a master tier average team, and we were good enough to play out some concepts where I just ended up getting more info about how drafts work in fives, and also just had to go through teaching some of the concepts that I talk about on broadcasts, or some of the things that I see teams do well. I had to bring to them, and I would probably never do that again because I was not able to commit enough time to those players, and they wanted more out of me. And I could have given that, but I didn't want to because that was not my path forward. In a way, it was a little bit of a back and forth there, but I was really lucky. I had a really great group of kids at Miami, and yeah, I was really lucky as a coach. I really had a great group. So that made that a lot easier. And then besides that, it was just whatever casting gigs I could find. And you kind of mentioned I started casting after COVID and then ended up in tier 2 caster world. I think the big part of the reason as to why was kind of what you hinted at earlier. Not every caster has coaching experience or has the experience of playing somewhat high elo on the ladder. I'll give myself GM as somewhat high elo.
It's high elo, man. It's high elo. It's like
early
top
season,
3%, right? It's top 3%.
Early, I mean, it's less than that, but it's early season. So, but I think that combination, like that, just I was able to go to every TO, and I was just like, hey, I coach, I play at this level, I'm a caster. Here's the last thing I was on, and I don't sound like garbage. So yeah, I ended up like. I got on a big league first. There was actually a interview process for that, and I had never really casted anything. And I ended up getting that. So thank you to XT and Returned, who put me on that product. And then I was streaming my prep for one of my casting days because it was COVID world, so I had nothing else to do. And then Cup Challengers Uprising ended up seeing that stream, and they just brought me in. Like, hey, like no one else is like showcasing the work they do. So I did that product, which I think we had more tools and better remote shows than the LCS at some points during that era, because we had Joe Physics behind the scenes, who's like the ultimate one-man producer and is working with LS now. And from there, I just kind of used that and leveraged every single TO in Scouting Grounds, and then ended up fighting through the Proving Grounds because like they had 7 TOs come in that spring. And the ones in the later half paid more. So I just worked to get those gigs. And from there, yeah, I was able to launch in everything else.
I think, you downplay your work ethic though a lot, right? And like kind of the work that you put in. Everybody knows it now, but you, in my mind, were one of the first individuals that was, at least publicly, people on Twitter be like, oh yeah, Cubby comes to us. He asks us questions. I believe, this is a deep pull, but I believe you said your sister has like a journalist background or something like that.
Yeah, that's a deep pull.
That's a deep pull. Yeah. And so you said you drew from that aspect of your life, specifically your sister, and you used that to like start asking questions for coaches, start getting really in depth, start building narrative storylines in a more journalistic sense. Do you think that's like what was unique to you at the time? Definitely during it, back when it was big league and cup and all that stuff, like on Twitter and everything else, you were very touted as like being a very dutiful caster and really trying to talk with players, coaches, and everything to get things right. Do you think that was unique to you and that's kind of what set you apart, or was it something else?
I think there were a few things. So I didn't start building relationships as much until 21, but I mean, I sat in the chair that the players and coaches do. So I remember going through old Unified Premier League broadcasts to do scouting for the collegiate teams we're going to face. And those would be some of the better teams. We had more tape on them. And back then, VODs were so... half the skill of being a scout as a coach was just knowing like who was who and like where to find VODs. And like you just find like the weirdest stuff to see like what they were playing or like what picks they were hiding. I remember like I'd sit in a room with my team and they'd be like, these casters don't know what they're talking about, right? And I would agree. And then I remember being up on stage. I still remember Gateway Legends. They were talking about my team. We could hear them. And my players were like, oh, that's right. Or like, oh, this isn't. I was like, well, what if like you just ask? And like one of the casters that worked the event, like they asked us. And so he got some things right. And then all my players were like, hell yeah. Like they did the work. And I was like, wow, it's like actually just that easy. So I always treated it like I think the other thing that I had an advantage of is that I've always treated this like a full-time job. Because I always wanted to make it my full-time job. Like once COVID hit, I worked a full-time job. I know the hours I put into that, what I needed to be successful. And so I just try and replicate that here. Like, hey, I need to put in the time, and like the only way I can make sure like I'm undeniable, like I can get chosen for these gigs, is if I know I'm always putting in the work and putting in the time to at least build relationships with teams and players where like they trust me to cover them, watching enough tape so that I know what I'm talking about, and doing that consistently because the game changes. And then yeah, I mean, besides that, like whatever other content or things that I like to work on, which are fun. Like VOD reviews for me are fun. I do like my job. So I think the fact that I had those experiences being in the other seats, and then I just always treated this like a full-time job, are probably the two biggest things that made sure I was able to, like, as you pointed out, kind of close the gap a little bit faster.
I don't think it would be incorrect to say that you should be the next full-time color caster for a major league, right? Specifically LCS. I don't think it's incorrect to say. I find a lot of people wouldn't disagree with me on that one. What do you think? And obviously talk about this as much as you can. Obviously you were featured on LCS at one point, this last split, but what do you think is stopping you maybe from becoming that full-time, LCS? Does someone need to step down? Because the thing was that when Freak stepped down or stepped away, it opened up a big hole for another play-by-play caster in form of Rafa. Do you think like a color caster needs to step down, or do you think there's something that you need to do, or is it just kind of you're just waiting? Like, is there a waiting room? Because I think a lot of people would agree, like you should be a full-time LCS caster. Do you ever get those emotions? Do you ever feel like, on some days, like, why am I not getting that call up, or what am I doing wrong, or explain that to me?
I mean, for me, no. I don't feel that way in the back half because I'm not there yet. Like once I'm there, then I'll feel that way. And also, I had the opportunity to go to LCK, which I've been pretty public about.
Yeah.
So I didn't. So I also made the choice to not be in that seat, and I thought I'd be more successful where I am now. It's tough because I mean, I'm really lucky in the sense that I've been able to build somewhat of a relationship with a lot of the people that are on the LCS talent team, and I have a ton of respect for them. Like I rushed home from high school to watch the first day of LCS. I've always watched the show and product. Like I can't look at Cubby and Azael and be like, my product is so much better than theirs. Even if even if it was, which it's not, that like they should pick me. Now I think that the product I bring is good enough to maybe be considered for like that opportunity, and I'm gonna keep working hard so that hopefully the next time, that happens, I can hop up. But it's tough because I mean one of the great parts about being a broadcaster and something that Cubby and Azael and so many other people on that show have done and earned, is that the audience trusts them to deliver the league, and they've earned that because they've worked hard to do that for years. Cubby's been doing this since its inception. There is no way that anyone else can compete with the amount of trust and faith that audiences, fans, and people have in Cubby to represent them on the broadcast and do the league. So if you're going to add someone, it has to, in a way, be a risk. And I think the biggest disadvantage that I have is the fact that I don't have the years of building that trust with an audience. I have that with challengers, and I've been lucky enough where I feel like I continue to earn that because it's something that you have to continue to earn, and it can go away in a heartbeat if you screw up. But it's not the challengers level and not at the pro level. And I think that that's like in terms of the difference that means for the global impact that you have and the brand that you have, it's really tough to combat because there is no other way to get that besides them choosing you for the show. Besides, being a content creator. And I've made content around my job, but I've never wanted to be a content creator. I've always wanted to be a cover caster for this game. And I think that is a big difference in kind of where things, in my opinion, conflict, because I want to be more of a pure broadcaster. Whereas I think that where a lot of the shows have been going is that they want to bring in people that have bigger brands that can be a part of the show, and then they can share that and get more people hopefully to tune in.
More eyes and stuff
yeah,
like that.
so yeah.
Perfect segue into that LCK opportunity, right? Because you were brought on as an LCK analyst. And I think you killed it, obviously. And then you mentioned that obviously you're pretty public about it. They offered you a full-time position. Hindsight is 2020, of course, and with everything that's kind of been happening within the North American ecosystem, do you kind of look back at that opportunity where you declined it? Do you look back at it as like, damn, maybe I could have been the next, I'm not going to say LS, but like I could have been the next great color caster coming out of LCK. I could have been the LCK guy, right? That might have been me in X amount of time or even instantly given your work ethic. Yeah. Like, do you look at that decision at any point with a little bit of like, fuck, like I should have taken that?
I mean, the one I'll say my biggest regret is just not being a part of that team. I love that team. Like everyone that helps out in that team, whether it's the people you see on camera or behind the camera, were awesome to work with. And that was from me being like overseas, getting up at just wee hours in the morning to do this. I really, really, really liked working on the LCK. And that was the hardest thing for me, was that I wouldn't be able to continue with those people because I really liked working with those people. But ultimately, like, my decision was a personal decision. I figured that as a human, I could just be more successful in LA. Korea is a long way from home. The difference between being able to get home and see family and not for me was big. So like this offseason last week, I went home. My best buddy got married. I stood in this wedding. I got home for a week. That's not something that I'm going to be able to do from Korea. And for me, if I could have the job I wanted here, even if it would take extra time to make this my full-time job, I was willing to work for that, to have the chance to still be able to like be a little bit closer to home and see family. And I personally, I'm not someone that like needs to go live abroad. I know that's an amazing experience that a lot of people would kill for. That's not me. I would rather still be in the Midwest. LA is too damn expensive. I love a lot of the people out here, but yeah, I think for me staying in America was just personally, I knew I would be more successful and more comfortable in my surroundings compared to Korea. And the hardest part was just not being able to work on that team. Like everyone on that show is really amazing, and Atlas and Chronicler get a ton of credit as they rightfully should, but also like Ox stepping in has been awesome. Uni, even like on the English analyst desk, has been hilarious. Like
Uni's been a really good addition. It was one of those like, how is he gonna work out? And
he's great.
Like fire, right? It's like amazing.
Yeah. Valdez and Wolf, like I think they work their ass off. They don't get nearly enough credit to like what I think they deserve, especially seeing the work they put in behind the scenes as well. Everyone on that team is just killing, and so like that was the hardest part about not going over there. But yeah, I ultimately made the decision where I personally felt like I'd be the most comfortable and set myself up for the most success. And so even with all the crap that's going on, I still believe that like nothing about that has changed personally, like where I sit. So, yeah.
Before we get into the crap that's going on, before we get into the wade through the feces, we gotta take a little bit of a visit into some of your hot takes. One in particular that I think a lot of people know you for, where you started getting wildfire. Now that take has cooled off, it's been a year now. I do want to deep dive into your mind because I don't think you've ever actually had the opportunity to kind of go on like a long form answer of why you thought this way. And I think I'm going to say it now. I think it's very miscategorized in what happened. And obviously the thing I'm talking about is that the Jojo inspired top 5 mid jungle duo at the time in 2022. Yeah. I think personally that take gets miscategorized because it is in the same vein as, when we had could Rogue beat TSM in a best of 5 how many times? Or could Jin Air, dominate NA? Like, it's one of those takes that on a surface level, if somebody else were to say this, somebody like a bigger personality, they may not get as much hate. They may not get as much flame.
I think they should have.
This is the thing, right? A lot of other content creators are allowed to cook, as the cool kids say, and you weren't allowed to cook. I mean, you were, but and so I want to give you the opportunity to kind of dive into your mind and like at the time, what were you thinking? Obviously, it was a year ago now, almost exactly. So obviously, maybe everything's not as you can't remember as clearly. But I do want to like expand on that. I want to know why you thought that way, not in a sense of I'm here to attack you like a lot of other people, but more on lines of like, what were you thinking? What were you cooking, man?
Well, it was like at the time where Kelsey, like we worked on challenges, and Kelsey's like, you need to like effing believe like in whatever you're gonna put out there, like be bold, like whatever. And LCS was asking for hot takes, and I think it was just after the game where EG played CLG for the second time. That was the only team that they dropped the round robin to, and they just obliterated them. And still like one of the best lane swaps I've seen around Herald with a Senna team. I still remember this game. They beat them in like 23, 24 minutes. Absolutely just blitzed CLG. And Jojo and Spire were playing well. EG had a good rep after, they didn't blow at MSI. And I was like, you know what? I think there might be a top 10 mid-jungle duo in the world. Someone has to believe in NA, right? And then I remember like Kelsey in the back of like my head. So like I put him like 7 or 8. I was like, screw it, top 5. It asked for a hot take. And then I made the mistake of arguing that Canavi sucked when Canavi is good. But I thought my argument with Canavi is that he's actually a less malleable player than Inspired. And I will stand by that, even though Canavi is like world class. I should argue that Yagao sucked because I still have bad memories of Yagao going way back in the LPL. And then, of course, like when Dom and Closer are like, what do you mean Canavi's good? Like, I mean, any chance you have of having any leg to stand on gets cooked. Now, the other thing that most people forget is that the other take I got flamed for was saying that Prince versus Ruler was the best marksman matchup that you could find in playoffs around the world. And everyone just piled on for me for this. And I swear I stand by that. Like, that those two were playing out of their mind in the LCK playoffs. And all the LPL fanboys were like, we have Viper versus Gala. How dare you?
Yeah.
And I was like, yo, Prince versus Ruler is like too insane. Like, you guys do not understand how good Prince is, or like the season that Prince had. So that was
You're
also like the other
though.
funny one.
You're vindicated because Ruler came to LPL, by the way,
and won. Yeah.
So, and that's where I look at him like, man, you got
that
like,
one was correct. I just got crap because like the other one, and I honestly that was like my revenge tweet. Like for sure, I was like, all right, this one's right. It's like everyone like dogpiled on me for this. I was like, all right, this take's actually right. I tweeted it out. I shut down like my second monitor. And it was after an LCK day because like after like the bracket got set, I was like, this is going to get flamed. I just made it, shut down the second monitor. I fired up Spider-Man on my computer and just played for like 2 hours. Looked at my phone before I went to bed. Twitter plus 20 notifications. Like, all right, screw that. We deal with it later. Put it away. It's like arguing in a Discord with someone. Somebody got kicked out of a Discord because they were like so vehemently like arguing with me about this. I was like, what? I was like, this is ridiculous. I was like, you guys, Prince was a freak. Prince Ruler was a freak. Yeah.
Someone got kicked out of a Discord server because they were arguing with you on whether Prince Prince versus Ruler. Wow. I mean, it's pretty funny. That gets heat. I mean, passionate fans, right? Passionate fans.
Yeah, and part of my argument was also it was how the teams were playing, because back then, now this changed in playoffs, but before playoffs, every LCK team was just picking tank top, and Dove would just like die and walk bot. Like literally, like he would just like walk bot and see like press R and see if he could make a play for Prince. And LPL, they were playing carry tops as they always do still. And so like that was the other part of the argument. Like because teams were taking so much utility around these marksmen, it was really like up to the marksmen to perform, to do all the DPS and carry their team in these fights. And Ruler and Prince were doing such an immaculate job of it throughout the regular season. I mean, Prince and LSB were on fire to wrap up. Like they 2-0'd T1 in like 26-minute fashion at the end of that regular season. Prince was playing out of his goddamn mind with the rest of LSB. So yeah, I that was like my revenge tweet for the Jojo inspired tweet, and I still stand by that one being correct. But yeah, that's like the funnier part. Because I would say like, Jojo inspired tweet was just fun. It's like the one thing I'll say is like someone's got to believe in NA. I don't care if like NA is like never gonna win internationally. You know, I grew up a Bears fan. When it's 0-0 at the start of the season, you know, I still believe a little bit. That's maybe that's just the Bears fan in me. Who knows?
and I think you know, you get miscategorized a lot as like somebody that only watches NA, but you try to do your best to like watch every region, right? I mean, you were a fan of LCK back when, you know, the Shy was playing, right? You were a fan of LPL, right? Like you were watching it when it was like Cola and all these, like obviously Uzi, Ming, Gala, all these guys, right? Like you're an old school fan. So like why do you think, I mean, I know why people think you only watch NA because you're the NA guy, but in terms of your knowledge and stuff like that, where would you rank like, oh, I watch this region, I know this region, I know this region. Obviously, I would assume NA is number one, but that 2, 3, and 4, like you worked LCK. Obviously, you're a fan of LPL. Like, where would you take your? Where would you? I mean, put your credit down.
I will say for anyone that wasn't exposed to me, and then the first thing they see is some cover caster in challengers thinks that Jojo Inspire is a top 5 mid jungle duo in the world. I probably wouldn't respect that person either. So I guess that is somewhat fair and a bad first impression. I've been watching EU. I watched LCS and EU LCS the year of its inception, season 3, because CLG EU was my favorite team, and so I was a Froggen fan. And I will say now, this was the season where I watched the least amount of other regions, but that's just because the NACL season was so goddamn aggressive, and it pretty much was like following. I mean, following the LPL was more insane, but honestly, it was pretty close to being as insane as that, given 2 streams of. I guess it wasn't every day, but it was a mass sprint every day. Or the days like it was 12 games a day, 36 games in 3 days. It was ridiculous. So this past split, I followed G2 and LEC. I watched all the LCS games, and then LCK I just tried to watch top teams, and that was really it. That's being generous. I barely watched any LPL this split, because the challenges was too much. In the past, I usually try and watch top teams from every region, even if it just means like catching some highlights. Sometimes, I mean, highlights isn't watching the game at all, but it at least gives me a feel for like what happened or like how a team won or lost sometimes. And then I just picked teams that I think are fun to watch. Like I watched all of G2's games because they had a really different take on the game, and some of their openers were just fascinating, and they're fun to watch. I love watching. Liv Sandbox was just so fun last year. Liv Sandbox was like my favorite team. Dove was so bad, but Prince was so good. It was just it was so fun.
Unstoppable force, try and immovable object level.
Yeah, I just like try and like pick some teams. Like if I'm like gonna go watch other regions, it's like, hey, like what stuff that like I won't get burned out watching, right? So usually it ends up being good teams. And in early splits, what I used to do is I would watch the first couple games of every team, and then I would just like start putting bad teams on highlights. I just like watch the highlights, like the bad teams. Because every once in a while, like you get bad teams, like they are forced to play a certain pick every game or a certain style every game, and they can't make it work. And it's like kind of like a one test of like, all right, can you make it work against this comp? Like, why did this work? You can still learn always. You can always learn. But yeah, I'm bracing myself for the spammage of tape coming up. It's going to be another aggressive season we got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to, like I said, before we get into the crap, I do want to kind of talk about this past NACL season and kind of some of the teams that, you know, may have been missed, right? Or maybe analysis wise kind of slipped through the cracks. So I talked to Beatdown about it when I had him on, and it was kind of a fresh thing, but now we've had some time to kind of process teams like Fear, teams like Wildcard, these teams that succeeded in the NACL. How did they kind of slip through the cracks, right? Because I know Fear was a team that was like very, very underrated, right? I mean, I think there's like they did their own compilation on Twitter of like everybody underrating them and stuff like that. So yeah, obviously at the beginning of the season, these players were scattered around and you were very kind of low on them. What was the reasoning behind that? Why was the general consensus around teams like Fear? I want to throw Wildcard in there, but they're kind of more of like a wonky team. But
I had Wildcard. I had Wildcard middle of the pack. Fear, I had them lower. Everyone did. But I felt like with Fear, I was like, all right. Faisal and Perry are actually good challengers players. I mean, Perry was in the finals with Tig as a sub, and Faisal for me was like always really strong. So I had questions about their bot lane, and then when they started playing, Manui was like vastly improved because like I got access to tryout VODs, right? And I talked to this on cast. Manui was like not doing well in tryouts this past season. But the kid's a hard worker. Everyone likes him. And he is really smart about the game. He's good at planning ahead. And he worked really hard with Trevor and got a lot better. Like he is a totally different player now from what he was in tryouts like last fall. So once I started seeing that, I was like, okay, well, actually Fear, like I thought their bot lane would get ran and they're not getting ran. And then they started drafting really well. I sat in one of their practices and they had a lot of resources, like people helping out from EU, like more resources than some of the challengers teams had helping them out. And these people were good guiding voices for them. The players liked them. People got along. So all of a sudden, like you have good team vibes and chemistry. I thought they drafted really well for the entire season. Like there were certain picks that you just could not give them. Olaf and Seraphine were both permabanned from this team. They were too good with those champions, like legitimately. No one else was like really building comps around that. Later, Wukong became big pick for Perry, but he was meta, but Perry's Wukong was really good. And then all of a sudden, Dignitas was like, their coach is like, hey, like Fear's good, like I respect them. And TL was like, yeah, Fear's like pretty good. Like behind the scenes, it's like, really? When we looked at the standings, they were like halfway through the season, I think they were tied for first or second, but they hadn't played any of the top teams. Like they hadn't played Dig, they hadn't played 100 Thieves, they only played TL. They hadn't played EG, like they 2-0'd EG.
I don't think they played Fly, them. Right?
No, they didn't play Fly. Like, they didn't play GG. Like, we did a graphic on broadcast. Like, they have all these games to go, and we're going to test Fear. And they failed the test for the first week. They got 0-4'd by Dig and another team. They played C9, like, way later. But then, like, once they started, like, splitting and then winning series against these teams, and they split the series against C9. I still remember, like, Faisal, like, after the interview, he was like, yo, that's, like, the craziest 2 games I've ever played. Like, I've never played a game at those levels. Like, and then after that, everyone started to scrim them because that's when they were like, all right, they proved on stage like, hey, this team's really good. And they are a really good team. They would magically come from behind and fight you and do things that other teams just didn't have the balls to do. They did because they trusted each other and they got along really well as a team. So yeah, I think that like for them, it was just kind of the magic sauce. I think that because Manui was so not the not like keeping those hires in the mud, you know. I thought he'd just like would be the worst AD in the league. He was far from that. I think that ended up shifting them up a lot, and then I don't know, just something. Sometimes when things are good, you know, things are good, and I think Fear really ran with it, and all the players were really willing to work with each other. From what I saw from the outside looking in, I thought that kind of made them work out pretty well. I don't know how people missed Faisal or Perry, though. That, for me, it was egregious. I think the rest were somewhat reasonable as to why they ended up on Fear. I've always thought higher of Trevor as a player, but I can get why an org doesn't want to take a 28-year-old support. And you know what? With this new format, Trevor got to stick it to all of them. So good for him, because he is a good player. So I think that, I don't know, they hit gold, and they were the easiest team to talk about because of how much better they did compared to expectations. It was just celebrating them all split, and they played damn good league. They really did.
All right, now we're getting to the crap. We're getting to the mud a little bit, and
you save it for the back half. You know, see if people make it here, right?
Yeah,
get rewarded with the crap.
No.
Yeah,
I put timestamps, so they'll just probably jump to this.
That's
what'll happen. That's what'll happen. I'll look at the view. It's like, okay, that's where they talk about this stuff. So just to catch everybody up with the timeline, it is May 31st, 2023. Yeah. Riot Games recently released their, I'm going to say, response to everything that's been happening, right? All the Pokemon tweet accounts leaking stuff, everything that's happening, you know, all the journalists, they're like, you know what, here's what we're actually doing right now. So they're delaying LCS 2 weeks. They've also, I'm gonna say, they've also threatened to cancel the LCS Summer split as a whole if agreements can't be met or arrangements can't be made with the LCSPA. Yep. They've actually responded to all of the LCSPA's, I don't want to say demands, but it's demands, right? This is what they want. This is what they idealistically, in an ideal world, this is what you want to give us. They've responded to each and every single one. They've kind of fulfilled only one. Realistically, one of the demands was already happening with the cost sharing that was already prevalent, but they also decided to give $300,000 over to, I believe, Rally Cry to kind of kickstart the production. So I just want to go through this with
maybe
you.
prize pool.
We don't know the details.
I will say I have inquired about that money, because if we do get more money, obviously it is my job as a broadcaster to make sure that we put it towards the best use for our show. I don't know where it's going. Now, it could go to us, it could not. Obviously, we found that out in the announcement yesterday. Could go in the prize pool, who knows? But yeah.
And I mean, it's easy. It would be easy to just kind of go through the list one by one, but I do want to kind of take a step back and really pick your brain, because I think a lot of people are misunderstood about why there is such an uproar and outcry around this, right? It's not just that the NACL has kind of been obviously virtually eliminated in some aspects, and that teams are not forced to field a team. But one of the main issues was that this was supposed to be phased out later on, right? I believe 2024 was the date. It was supposed to be phased out. And pretty much what happened was that Riot pulled the rug underneath the LCSPA, right? Or yeah, the LCS Players Association. They were in constant talks for months to find a solution. They were in talks to kind of, hey, we will eventually want to phase out the requirement that tier 1 teams have to field a tier 2 team, but we want to get it to a point where it's still sustainable and maybe, evolve it into a different system. That was supposed to happen in 2024. Obviously, in the past couple of weeks, all of those conversations were thrown out the window. Everything was disregarded. Riot, in a lot of people's opinion, wasn't acting as an actual kind of negotiator. They weren't acting as an honest partner, whereas the LCSPA were working towards something. So this isn't just in a response to, Riot eliminating that, but also I think what a lot of people need to understand is that the LCSPA, in my opinion, needs to take a stand, because if Riot is allowed to do that, then they set the precedent that they're just, whatever the LCSPA talks about, we can just pull the rug under them. Do you think that's an apt kind of introduction or reasoning behind why the LCSPA is doing it? Because it's not just tier 2. It's, hey, we're supposed to be working together on the ecosystem, and right now you guys are acting like a dictator.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start at the start, because NACL was going to change in 2024. It was.
Yes.
And it was likely going to change in the fact that teams aren't going to be required to run academy teams or challengers teams. I'll stay corporate here. I'm okay with this. We had TSM in the league, and I'm not going to pick on the players. I'm going to pick on the org. They did not support their players with a coach. I don't care if your roster has Haunter, Svensker, and Wild Turtle on it. The fact that you do not give them a coach is a disgusting competitive disadvantage you're giving them, putting them in a really unfair place. And that is not a team that I want in the league, because they are not supporting their roster or their players. I don't think that every team should be required to have one. You can open it up to better partners. I'd rather have Disguised Toast in than TSM. I really would. They're going to hopefully, the weak roster has a coach, so they're already supporting their team more than TSM did, right? I'd rather have that. The issue that I had is the manner in which this was handled, because it was done so fast. They hit it in the MSI news cycle, and they were trying to sweep it under the rug. And yes, the PA is doing what they should do, which is make waves about this. And I will give the PA credit. They've done a good job at making waves about whatever they want. That is part of what you have to do in a strike, right? Get public sentiment on your side, and you see that war going on between them and Riot right now. That's going to happen whenever, this happens. Now, you were somewhat hinting at something that I'm very nervous about, and that is that this will start with Tier 2 and end with nothing about Tier 2 changing. And I think given what some of the Players Association asks have been, I don't know how they can change NAC. The damage is already done. I really don't know. You can't go back and get the 7 teams back in. And honestly, again, I'm not saying that I want the 7 teams back in. Now, I will say there is one clause that a lot of people are misinterpreting. And I have a source from a player that actually put this forward and described it to me. It was a part of the meetings. It is the 4th one, I believe, where it's 3 out of 5 players on the NACL team could still play in the slot. So what that means what that clause is, what the players want, is that if an org chose to disband their team, if 3 out of the 5...
Take Tony Top, for example.
Not that one, if one of the franchise orgs. Because yeah.
Okay.
So, like, for example, Golden Guardians are not running a team. If 3 out of the 5 players from that Challengers roster still wanted to compete in Challengers, under that rule, they would be allowed to, and then allowed to find their own sponsor and, like, their own team.
I see.
So the players would still be able to compete. And honestly, if they wanted to do that for no pay and then go look on their own, I would support that, given how crappy it's been because of like how fast this was turned around. I actually think that's a very reasonable ask, and it's being really misinterpreted right now. But again, I think the damage has been done. Like, you cannot reverse what's going on with NACL. There's no way. So I think that whatever ends up happening next, I think that the LCS players or the players in the Players Association will try and get a few guarantees for themselves, but they don't have any power. Like, there's no union behind it. And you were dealing with the reality of the fact that the game developer, they're judge, jury, and executioner in all things. And it's always been this way with Riot in League of Legends esports. And so yeah, like the Players Association, they're doing the best to make waves and do what they can, but this is what happens when you didn't unionize back in 2018. Also back then, you could add a collective bargaining agreement where you have to have a union in order to get something like a salary cap. If that's not the case, the salary caps would have been illegal. So who knows? Maybe the players would have saved owners from solo super inflating the bubble. Now, I'm never going to blame a player for signing a contract that's good for them. That was the stupidest thing I've seen out of all this. Like, why do players sign contracts that got them so much money? Like, what would you do in their shoes, right? Like, you should go out and fight for your right on the open market, see how much money you can get for your services. That was one of the many funny takes I've read. But again, like, they don't have any power. There's no union and no collective bargaining agreement between the player union and the league, which happens in every other major sport. So what power do they have? Yeah. Like, again, players have a lot of power. I'm proud of them for walking out. I think that they should look out for themselves. And I think that what happened here was wrong from the owners and Riot and the players. I think that there was some wrong done. I just don't know how it gets walked back. And I am not confident it's going to have any concessions for Tier 2. Besides the $300,000 going to the TO, which, as someone that works on the broadcast, that money should go anywhere but us. Like, stipend some player rosters, right? If this was such a big concern. That was a solution that I know was like recommended or put forward towards Riot that they could have done to at least push the boat into 2024 so that they would have months to make this decision. Instead, every team was forced to make a snap decision within a week, and a lot of teams dropped.
And I think the confusing part for a lot of people is that there are actually 3 entities right now, right? There's the players, there's the orgs, and then there's obviously Riot Games. And it feels like the players have taken their stance. They've drawn their line in the sand, obviously Riot as well. But it feels like the orgs, I'm not going to say they're caught in the crossfire necessarily, because you kind of, you make your bed and you lay it, or you made your bed, you got to lay in it, right? Like you said, mentioned huge player salaries, giant facilities, right? I love the tweet that you had with like the $50 million facility and stuff like that. Hilarious stuff.
I've enjoyed the shit posting in the past few weeks. I had to resort to humor in dark times.
I've seen the shift in the Twitter, but it doesn't seem like all 3 entities can come out where they are all happy with what they got. Do you think that's fair to say? The way it's working out and the way it's looking out, it doesn't seem like all 3 entities are going to be happy with whatever the outcome is.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's just such a mess, and I mean, I think that orgs are to blame for the fact that, like, they're all complaining about the spending on this space. You set the market. Look at the spending in the past. Like, VC money doesn't grow on trees. You need returns eventually. They didn't plan ahead. When times were good, they made sure that times were good, and they threw a lot of money into the black hole that was player salaries. Again, I'm all for players getting paid, but the only way you get to sign someone for a 2-year, $6 million contract is if you set the market that way. You can opt to not do that. Teams pushed it to that point and didn't have enough money to support this in the long haul. Honestly, the facilities have been going hard on that, but honestly, at least that's an asset. It's not a black hole, so good for teams. They could have divested some of those facilities if they wanted to support other teams, by the way, which none have done, even when downsizing a lot of their company. Yeah, I think players got caught in the crossfire, but again, players don't have power because they never unionized. So now it's like they're walking out, but again, what power do you have? And the one thing I'll really blame Riot for is actually even saying that we're going to have LCS and forcing all the orgs to look for scabs or look for players. If you are the GM of a building and it is in the rules that if you don't field the team, then you could lose your franchise slot. If you fail to field a team and you lose your franchise slot, everyone in that building loses a job. I really can't blame orgs for trying to look for people to field a team. I really cannot. Riot put them in a crappy position, and they had to make this change to at least bring out all parties to the table. And now is when things get interesting. Again, I don't think the players have any power. Riot's they're going to say no to everything, and they put the public pressure on where if this is resolved in 2 weeks, then we have no LCS, no world slot. No competitor wants that world. So hopefully we can see some parties at least make some concessions to come to the middle of the table. I would just be shocked if any are in favor of challengers. I think this is going to start with challengers being cut and the ruckus around that, and it will end with nothing happening to that, getting some guarantees for pro players, like maybe minimum salary guarantee moving forward and maybe some health benefits, and then that's going to be it. Because
glasses, teeth, dental. So
yeah, I don't know how you can reverse the decision in tier 2, and it sucks because I think that again, this was a decision that I knew was going to happen in 24, but the owners rushed it through. They're all using the excuse of this is too much money for what it's worth to us. We can go through the last 5 years of how they actually use their academy slot and how they failed to use it. If you use it right, then the difference of salary between a rookie player that you promoted and the import that would be the same skill of them could be a lot less. And you can use that difference to justify having your challenges roster. Because guess what? For some teams that I talked to, that difference afforded them the roster for the entire year. Like that difference of salary. Like that would have paid for a year's worth of that. But, since the buyout market's dead, they can't use these players as trading cards anymore. They decided to kill it off early. And they're all going to claim that it's low viewership, which no one has ever brought up or cared about in a dev league, by the way, but they can now because they can weaponize it looking at ERLs. And then spending. When you look at the apparent spending that we've had in the past, I don't really think you can use spending. I obviously you can now, but it's like, okay, now times are bad. Like we have to go lick our wounds for mistakes we've made in the past. Mistakes you've made in the past. That's why you can't spend on something that is literally 17% of your operational spend. Now that is a lot to cut in a company, but it doesn't calculate for how high the salaries still are for top tier players. And I don't want to bring everyone down,
right?
Huh?
There were academy players on rosters that had like insane buyouts, right? Or they were signed for a lot, and they were just kind of standing on the sideline, right? That's the part where you're saying like, you made your bed, lick your wounds, like you created this, right? Like you to the teams. Obviously, the teams created this issue.
Like when teams are like, "Oh, we haven't seen enough promotions." Like I can't tell you how many players that have been in buyout prison, or it's like if there were 0 buyouts the way that there really were this offseason, 2-3 years ago, so many more players would have gotten promoted. Literally, so many more players would have gotten promoted.
Obviously, I don't. I'm just speculating, by the way, in terms of like I don't know contract jail and stuff, but like players like Copy, so many other players.
Oh, Tenacity can be like a lot of LCS teams have always looked at them, right? I mean, that's just like one easy example. TL, they did a lot of winning in the last 2 years. Now they internally promoted a few players, which is great. That's what you want, but also who knows? Maybe you could have had someone bid for Yawn, or Yawn would have had the opportunity to go play elsewhere. But again, teams viewed those players as long-term assets, so they set buyouts to protect those long-term assets, and then they would like cop out and be like, all right, we're going to import instead. Or they'd sell out eventually. And so pretty much what ended up happening is that you just buy out jailed for a couple years, and then because of that, people were forced to get imports because imports were cheaper. You can get cheaper buyouts, cheaper contracts, because like we set the NA Academy player like salary too high. Like, and they're like, well, we can find better players elsewhere. Well, part of that, like you pay these guys so well, you didn't really give them a chance to play even. Like you kind of like sat them on the sidelines. It was really garbage. Like again, the market is purely set by the teams. No one else affects that market besides teams globally. So if spending got out of control, no one else is to blame but you. And that really is like where I think orgs have been let off very easy. I don't even care about like the facility spendings. Like that's huge for like your valuation as a company, right? Like you can use that asset always. It's really not that bad. But throwing money in the black hole like rosters and salaries is just brutal. It's just funny to make fun of like, you know, $40 million facilities because of like where we're at now, right? I mean, TSM built that facility and it's like freaking empty. Like that's too easy not to make fun of.
It's a ghost town.
Yeah.
Pointing the gun at the teams now. I do want to kind of talk about the Players Association's demands because it the way I'm reading it, it actually some of it's not feasible, right? Like let's just be flat out.
No.
Like, the Valorant style promotion is not feasible. It's just a completely different environment. But I would argue even like a majority of this stuff isn't actually beneficial to the tier 2 scene, right? Like in my mind, if the idea is to foster a competitive and rich tier 2 environment, you would create incentives based around those specific issues, right? Or sorry, those specific things, right? So like one example I think is like if you were to field 3 out of 5, I'm just going to use 3 out of 5 as an example, 3 out of 5 players that have never competed like in an LCS year, right? Or a full split or a full year, right? And these players are fresh and you develop them, like you should get a stipend, not like $300,000, but like you should be rewarded for fielding talent that has not been fielded at a higher level, right? So like it kind of combats the veterans going back down, but also promotes the enrichment of new talent, right? Like if you have players, like you said, Hunter, Wild Turtle, 2 of these guys, you need veterans to develop rookies, but you want to be rewarded for trying to develop rookies and trying to get these guys to the next level. Like it feels like a lot of this stuff, and we can quickly go through it, doesn't actually benefit the tier 2 scene as much as I thought it would, right? Or it's not conducive to the development of like, hey, we want to make sure there are NA players going through the NA pipeline to the NA LCS and competing for the NA LCS at Worlds, right? And you mentioned like the 3/5 continuity. I think the Riot guarantees LCS contracts, right? Or minimum contracts for the NACL Summer. I don't think that's feasible because that takes roster building power out of the teams, right?
Yeah.
Like I think there's a lot, like even the committing to the revenue share is kind of another can of worms that, you know, we can talk about separately. But what are your thoughts on kind of the Players Association's demands? And do you actually think they are conducive for a thriving tier 2 environment, or do you think there should be other stuff that needs to be put on the board? Like, is there just not enough for tier 2 here?
No, but I think that their job right now is to get public pressure and put public pressure on the orgs and get them on their side. So I think that some of the demands they're making just to kind of stir up and like put in the heads like, hey, Riot will look bad if they say no to guaranteed minimum salary and health benefits, right? So part of it's like to try and make like this is the court of public opinion that we're doing this in. That matters in terms of getting an org to cave or not. So I think the PA is actually doing a decent job of that, but I don't think a lot of the asks were realistic. I mean, I think the best ask would be like if you're like in Challengers League, like yeah, as you said, get a stipend. Like if you promote players, like if you win, like you actually commit to the talent pool, or maybe there's a luxury tax on having a bonus import like in your challenger system. And I already know from like talking with a lot of GMs, a lot don't want to import for challengers unless they're top half of their role, because then you could get a buyout scenario. And that's the rumor with Unforgiven being on EG. I don't know if that was a buyout or not, but like that's the theory, right? With Unforgiven going from 100 Thieves challengers to EG. You can actually use that and make money off that player, right? That's been it in the past. So I think that things will get more realistic at the table. I think that what we're seeing right now in the court of public opinion, each side is trying to make the other look unreasonable or look like the bad guy. And I hope that talks get better as we move forward. But no, I don't think what they put forward was realistic, but also I don't think what they put forward was meant to look realistic. I think they were meant to get no's and be like, hey, they're the bad guy for like saying no to everything, right?
Yeah, shoot for the stars so you land the clouds kind of thing, right? Like, hey, we're going to go really, really high and we're going to get somewhere. We're going to get somewhere, right? And like you said, court of public opinion. Obviously, you've got a humongous amount of content creators talking about it. and bringing it up. But it just feels like Riot is playing hardball, right? Like they're willing to bleed the Players Association out and the orgs out, right? Because to them, they've got nothing but time for them, right? Like it feels like the threat of canceling the summer split, who knows if they'll actually do it? But at the same time, it's in the back of your head, they could do it. They really could, because a lot of their money is not made off of LCS and stuff like that. So if they're purely looking at it from like a profit or revenue or, in the books, they stop it for a summer and all this goes away and you come back and now it's like, well, what can the Players Association do? What can the orgs do? They're at the behest of Riot Games, correct?
I mean, the game developer is judge, jury, and executioner, as always. And that's some of the difficulty. The fact they don't have a union, don't have a lot of power here. So it's really tough.
Well, like I said, we'll eventually get more news on it as the weeks come by. I do want to shift over a little bit to some more positive news.
Ooh,
you mentioned it
we have
earlier.
That?
Yeah, we got some stuff happening, man. We've got some stuff happening. You did mention it earlier. I do want to get your thoughts about the DSG roster, the leaked one. The Fake God, Tomio, Young, Meech, Zazel, right? And coach/GM. Interesting title for Golden Glue. He's both the roster mastermind and the coach. I want to get your thoughts, not necessarily how it will compete against the board, but just kind of, what do you think about this roster? Like, do you think DSG did a good job? Do you think this guy's looked for the right people? Like, Fake God is somebody that, has kind of been competing for a while. Obviously said Young, Meech, Zazel is somebody that's a veteran that's been like kind of working his way back in. But like this core, I would say, of like Tomio, Young, Meech looks very, very good from an outside perspective. But what do you think about this whole roster?
I mean, it makes sense to me. You get Zazel Tomio combo again. Fake God's self-sufficient, and then Young likes to make plays, play melees, and then Meech can be janitor. That, like, not only does the roster, I think the roster, like, I can see how the players fit together. Someone makes sense, but also, yeah, you have a couple young players that could be exciting moving forward. And it's a great opportunity for them to kind of build themselves up. A great opportunity with Toast. So yeah, for me, I mean, the roster made sense. I thought that both Meech and Young, especially Young in his rookie split, did really well. Whereas Meech, it's like kind of sophomore year now for him because he came in summer of last year, I believe.
Pseudo sophomore. It's weird. Yeah.
So, and with Meech again, you get to lane with Zazel. I've always had a lot of respect for Zazel as a player. Whenever this guy's competed, he's been really good. So it's a really good opportunity for everyone.
Well, Cubby, we're hitting the hour and about 10-minute mark here. I really appreciate it, man, picking your brain about kind of everything, right? We kind of went all over. We talked about your casting. We talked about the game theory. We talked about rank. We talked about your hot takes, which I hope we still get some. And we also obviously touched on the news that everybody's probably going to skip to when the timestamps come out. But man, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're casting CLOL this coming weekend. You will be a part of NACL or whatever it happens to be in the next split. Any other plans? Anything else you got going?
No, just follow me on Twitter at CubbyXX, and then usually this is where I say Twitch too, but I'm still banned right now for the podcast. For the hand, yeah. We showed Mark's hand. Mark's hand's getting a lot of mileage in terms of PR right now. But I'll probably be streaming to YouTube in this meantime. So, we'll see if I can drum up the brand, get some contract offers coming out for each, get some competition going. No, just kidding. I kind of miss the fact that I'm not able to stream on Twitch at the moment. But, give me a follow and then, support Tier 2 League of Legends, as always. We need your support now more than ever, actually, according to what's going on. So, can't wait to show the owners that, we're going to get so many more viewers because how interested people are in for challenges and stuff. It'll be fun.
Well, you heard it here, guys. Watch Tier 2 League of Legends. Watch Cubby when he gets unbanned off of Twitch. Also, watch Raising NA. I know you guys, Rafa and Joshi have a podcast. It's kind of, I don't know if it's on a set schedule, but watch that. It obviously is on Cubby's channel. And I'll put all the socials, all the links, everything that's happening in the description box below. But Cubby, man, I really appreciate it. You're a busy guy, and it's really nice to see you kind of come out, talk League of Legends, talk amateur, talk everything. I really appreciate it, man.
I'm looking forward to the season getting started again. Hopefully, I just want to be able to do my job. So, and appreciate your flexibility as well. As had some big meetings yesterday. I got to sit in. May or may not have led to any of the announcements that we saw on the timeline. But yeah, I'm glad we could actually get this in. So appreciate it.